Jim Morrison, charismatic lead singer of The Doors, was a legendary rock and roll idol, a poet, and a visionary. When he died at the age of 27, he left a huge legacy. Money he would never see, and a legacy that would be fought over for years to come.
Even if he didn't have money when he died, with the royalties and the song rights, his image, it was going to grow to be worth millions regardless.
And it continues to grow. Though Morrison himself never cared too much about money.
Fame and the money wasn't about, he was about the music. And that was who he was.
The fame, the fortune, the legacy of Jim Morrison.
I miss Morrison much like I miss Hendrix. It's a band whose name and brand is worth fighting for, worth cherishing in any forum, anytime.
Jim Morrison's legacy will live on, not for 10 years, not for 20 years. It'll live on forever.
Singer Jim Morrison leads one of the most famous rock bands of the 60s, The Doors. The group pioneered psychedelic rock and racked up 7 top 10 releases on the charts. Morrison's impact on both our culture and our music industry spreads far and wide. And where there's impact, there's fortune. Now, almost a half-century after his death, his music, his writing, and his image are recognizable worldwide. Morrison continues to feed what seems to be an everlasting and at times voracious appetite for all that is Jim Morrison. Decades later, Jim Morrison is still making millions. But wealth wasn't Jim Morrison's original goal. He just wanted to make music and, of course, shake up a generation while he was at it. This is the story of all that he left behind. The creative force behind the band that inspired a generation, James Douglas Morrison, is born on the 8th of December 1943 into a working-class military family in Melbourne, Florida. Actually, I don't remember being born. It must have happened during one of my blackouts. As Morrison grows up, he reads voraciously. He has an extraordinary IQ of 149. His family moves around a lot, so Morrison seeks constancy in the works of writers and philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche and Jack Kerouac. He finds the name The Doors in a passage from poet William Blake. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. A teenage Morrison also takes comfort in alcohol. Even so, he graduates both high school and college and then heads for the artsy community of Venice Beach. Money is tight, so he lives on a rooftop on a combination of canned beans and LSD. There he pens the lyrics to songs including Hello, I Love You and Moonlight Drive.
Legend has it that Jim Morrison met Ray Manzarek on Venice Beach. It was the classic case of Jim Morrison saying, hey, listen to this song, and he played him Moonlight Drive. And bells went off, and a light bulb went off in Ray Manzarek's head because he wanted to be a rock star too. And he said, oh my God, we can make millions off this song. And, well, the rest is history because that's what brought them together. And then came John Densmore and Robbie Krieger, all of them very talented in their own right, and hence The Doors.
But before they can even record a song, in 1965, Morrison gets called up to the draft.
Jim Morrison wasn't a go-along, get-along type. He was out to challenge authority in any way that he could. So suddenly the long arm of the state reached in and said, young man, we want to use you as fodder in Vietnam. And he said, I'm not going down with that program. So apparently he stayed up, took some recreational drugs, showed up at the draft board looking a little worse for the weather, and then used the H-bomb, which used to drive federal authorities nuts. I'm a homosexual. Now, mind you, don't ask, don't tell was radical back in those days. Being a homosexual could have gotten you incarcerated in the 1950s in the United States. So Morrison was an edge player. His message to Uncle Sam was, you can fight that war with somebody else's body. I ain't going.
Admiral Morrison's son would not be serving his country in Vietnam. He's got music to make. Morrison's first step is to record a demo with The Doors. Almost broke, the Doors score free studio time through a friend of Manzarek. In 3 hours, they record a 6-track record. It's turned down by almost every music label. Regardless, Jim never stops believing in the Doors. In 1966, they become the house band at LA club London Fog, earning him $40 a week. The charismatic frontman soon starts to catch the attention of the crowd, and in particular, of one striking redhead by the name of Pamela Corson. Gaining a small following, the band moves on to the hipper Whiskey A Go-Go, and a more impressive salary of $135 each a week. Morrison blows his entire first paycheck on a fancy dinner for him and Corson. Then one night, Jack Holzman of Elektra Records walks into the club. Jim was a coiled spring ready to burst forth. I just went on a gut feeling. After the set, Holzman goes backstage with an offer, a 3-album contract for $5,000, with a 5% royalty on the table. In 1966, for an essentially unproven band, it's a generous deal. The Doors' self-titled debut, a tour de force of literate, visionary acid rock, drops in 1967. It hits number 2 on the charts, blocked only by the Beatles' number 1, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That summer, the Doors have their first number 1 single, Light My Fire. Morrison is on a meteoric rise. He rakes in $50,000 from performance revenue, album, and singles sales, and he's quickly declared a sex symbol. Morrison tells his father he's going on the road with his band. Admiral Morrison, who had long hoped his son would follow his father into the Navy, tells Jim he's being ridiculous. He's not a singer. He should get himself a real job. The Doors head out on their first tour. Then in September 1967, Ed Sullivan asks the Doors to perform on his show.
Ed Sullivan, he had already introduced the world to the Beatles, so it only made sense that the next sensation, the Doors, would be on the show. But when Ed met the Doors, he was a little taken aback by, the hardcore rock and roll personalities that confronted him on the set. And he also looked at the lyrics to the song, and in Light My Fire, Girl, We Couldn't Get Much Higher, Ed allegedly insisted that they change the lyrics to Girl, We Couldn't Get Much Better. Apparently, Jim Morrison agreed to that. And what happened was, the show aired live, and when they got out stage, Jim Morrison defiantly belted out, Girl, We Couldn't Get Much Higher. And that was it. I mean, Ed Sullivan was so offended that not only would he never book them again, he wouldn't even shake their hands after the performance. However, the world saw it, live television, and they loved Jim Morrison all the more for it.
Morrison's going to sing whatever he wants. And with a legion of fans behind him, he's unstoppable. Quickly, the Doors release their second album, Strange Days. It hits number 3 on the charts and sells 1 million copies. Morrison's star is rising, along with his issues with drugs and alcohol, and his disregard for authority.